then also if you think about, what God desires for us in being in relationships, this is such a critical tool for us to see and appreciate others, to really see in a clearly identified way how you walk into a situation and you process it totally differently than I do.
Absolutely.
In our marriages, with our kids, in business relationships, to have that sense of appreciation and to understand that someone else is going to process it. Therefore, when they take a action that we may not agree with, we can have, in your words, that very curiously compassionate approach in relationship.
Hey, welcome back to the Daron Earlewine podcast. Daron Earlewine here with you with my good friend Janelle DeWolf. Janelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Daron.
So we are deep diving into spiritual DNA in this series of podcasts for a couple months now. As Spiritual DNA, the brand new version is about to come out. And one of the new sessions we've added in this time around, Janelle, is the Enneagram. And I'm really fired up that we've added it. It's made such an impact in my life over the past, 4 or 5 years. And you are an Enneagram coach. And so give us just a little bit of an overview of who you are, what you're about, and kind of how you got into the Enneagram and, married, kids. Just give us all the vitals real quick.
Janelle DeWolf. I am married, 3 kids. I feel like that kind of comes first.
Yeah.
And I am co-owner of a leadership development firm called B23 Strategies, and we use the Enneagram coaching within that development process as well. And Enneagram for me I was introduced to it about probably 7 years ago in my own personal growth path.
Yeah.
And even growing up, the daughter of a psychologist who had been exposed to multiple personality typing tools, have definitely always had an interest in that. Enneagram set itself apart for me in the growth that I was able to see in a short period of time and the journey that I saw ahead of me.
Absolutely. Yeah. In your work with B23, you work with Tracy Cheatham, who's been a part of our team in Blackbird for years, helping me develop spiritual DNA. And you guys are going to hear a lot more about B23 in the coming years and months, because we're partnering together this year, excited about some of the strategy, coaching, and development that we're going to be able to do in the corporate side of things. And I'm just excited to be able to partner with you and with Tracy, and just some of the very first run of things we've been able to do together has been so meaningful. And the Enneagram, we brought it into DNA this time around as we revamped everything, Janelle, because for me, I love all the assessments. When I put, created spiritual DNA, I started with the 5-fold. Actually, no, that's not true. When I first started, I started doing spiritual gifts inventories with people.
Okay. And
that was great, and it helped people. But I always tell people spiritual gifts are kind of these supernatural spiritual tools that kind of God gives you in your tool bag to accomplish great things and do ministry. But if you don't know really what your role in God's kingdom is, or like what's your position on the team, I got this bag of tools, I don't know what I do with them. And so then I started taking people through passion-based assessments, which started to help people feel like I'm passionate about this. I've got these spiritual gifts, and that was helpful. And then I discovered, the 5-fold ministry functions of Ephesians chapter 4, and I added that to spiritual DNA. And then I discovered strength finders, and it was all putting these pieces together of like, man, when I layer these assessments on top of each other, I get an amazingly clear picture of who God's created me to be. But a lot of those assessments help me with who, and they help me with what. Like, here's what I do well. Here's who I am in God's kingdom. But where I kept kind of getting in my own way, if you will, in life, was not so much the whats or the wheres, but it was, I didn't know what was motivating me. I didn't know my why. Why do I do what I do? Why do I react the way I do? Why do I keep, in the positive or a lot of times in the negative things in my life? Why are some of these patterns tough to get around? And the thing that unlocked so much for me as far as a spiritual growth place with the Enneagram is it helped me get clear on core motivations and what was really going on inside of me.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why I'm so stoked to bring it into spiritual DNA, because I think we've got to know what's really happening below the surface if we're going to ever become the person God's created us to be.
Right. it does such a good job of helping us see why we're broken, how we're broken, but also how to heal it.
Yeah.
And I agree that it's not just a single isolated tool, but it truly can give us a journey toward growth, lifelong growth.
Yeah, which is huge. And I think one of the things that I joke about, and all these videos we've done that we're giving kind of a highlight and a deep dive into DNA, we've shown a little video that comes from the actual spiritual DNA new course stuff. And I want to start off and show the intro to the Enneagram session because what I unpack in this session, in this intro, is that I like to call the Enneagram, it's the accidental selfie cam of the soul. And that'll make a little bit more sense after you watch this clip, and we'll come back with Janelle and I and get a little deep on the conversation. So enjoy the intro from the Enneagram session of Spiritual DNA. Check it out.
I was thinking about the Enneagram and how to get you guys to get your mind around what it's like to interact with the Enneagram. And here's what I figured out. Have you ever had one of those moments where you're like looking at your phone and then you accidentally hit the camera button, right? And the selfie camera comes on, but you're in the most unflattering, like your hair's not combed, whatever. Somehow you knew you had a few chins, but all of a sudden you have 18 of them, right? And so it's like you open your phone and you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like, who is that? And then you're like, oh, it's me, right? That's kind of the Enneagram, okay? It is you get this really, really beautiful, sometimes not so beautiful reflection. It's a mirror of your soul and who you are. And it's very, very helpful in that way. But as we go through this session and as you dig into the Enneagram, I'm going to tell you, this is deep water stuff. And there's not a chance that in the next 28 minutes, you're going to be like, I get it, right? This is an introduction and an invitation to this journey in becoming who you were born to be. But there are going to be some accidental selfie moments as you walk into the Enneagram, but I think you're going to enjoy it. Because here's the deal. The Enneagram is so beautiful because it helps us deal with why. Okay? So God works this way. God is very, very, I'll even say obsessed with who, why, and then what. If you think about what we just talked about through Covenant Triangle, right? God is obsessed with your identity, who you are. He focuses on who. Then he wants to invite you to really understand your why. Why do you do what you do? Why do you not do what you don't wish you did? He wants you to dig into why. Once you understand who, and you got a handle on why, your what takes care of itself. We do this backwards, very similar to what we just talked about in the Covenant Triangle. We're obsessed with what? We're obsessed with what? Then we talk a little bit about who, but most of us never dig deep enough to actually deal with our why. Your why are your core motivations and intentions. And when we don't dig deep enough to allow God to bring us curiosity and grace to understand our why, a lot of times the dysfunction of our life or the dissatisfaction with life are a mystery to us forever. What I want to invite you into with the Enneagram is that your life would move out of mystery and into wonder.
And we're back. I don't know. We've not had any podcast, listeners let me know whether you hate and or love the "and we're back." I love it. That's why it's still a part of the podcast. If you would like to sign a petition to get me to stop doing that, we can do that. You can still reach out to us at all times. You know what I mean? Send me a text, 317-550-5070. You can always reach out to us here in the podcast. But that's the intro. And that, I think, Janelle, I think it's Richard Rohr that says if you're trying to figure out your type, one of the best ways to do it is read all 9 types, and whichever one leaves you feeling the most humiliated, that's probably a great place to start.
Completely.
Because there are these moments, I think, where we have this in Enneagram language, right? Our false self, this persona that we've created that's been able to bring us some happiness, bring us a sense of power, control, satisfaction. And one thing I say later on in the video is this false self, it does work for us, right? But a lot of times relationally, it's not working out.
Right.
So what does that look like, the idea of something doing work for us? How does that false self, can you unpack a little bit how we leverage that to work for us?
I think, throughout life, we have put these layers of personality on, and that's really how in even a lot of the other personality typing systems, we can identify ourselves by those behaviors and how we're kind of making our way in the world. And so those are the layers of our personality. And the really cool thing about Enneagram is it shows us those, and it shows us a lot of identifiers with those layers, and
some of those can be very positive.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, take yourself for a 7.
Yeah.
I mean, the layers of personality and how a 7 shows up in the world is so fun.
Yeah.
We love being around 7s.
Yeah.
We love how they show up in the world. But what it shows us is, okay, yeah, awesome. We're all awesome. We all have these great aspects of our personality.
Yeah.
But when we're using them and not necessarily identifying really what's at our core and how God made us and really what that true self is, we can see where all those layers start to get in our way.
Yeah. And that's the thing that was, like I said, the accidental self, of the soul was the life-giving thing. And I guess maybe this can be any assessment that's a part of spiritual DNA, is that you maybe sometimes maybe you're not ready for it.
Right.
You're not ready for that level of introspection. You're not ready for that level of reflection, or you're at a place where you're just not healthy and able to grow. One of the things that the time that the Enneagram came into my life, it was that I was at a place where I was compassionately curious in a place where I was ready to know, like, what is the thing that's driving me that I can't quite get my mind around? I can't quite get my heart around. And I'll be honest, I didn't like it as I started to get into that true self. The 7, right? It's in we're going to unpack the triads here in a minute, the intelligence centers, but it's in the head triad, which for me was something trying to figure out, to realize that I am constantly thinking and planning, and an obsession with planning and the future and all these things. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And then at the core sin of a 7 is gluttony. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading that and being like, oh gosh, that sucks. But yeah.
Right.
And just, for a 7, and I love it, as you get into the Enneagram, you're going to see that everyone, you can identify a core sin, these motivations, and like a slogan for life. And, for the 7, for mine, it was more is better.
More is better.
And I was like, that has been a sentence that has created every great opportunity in my life and every pain in my life.
Sure. And it gave you that growth path of how you can stop using it, of getting it in your own way and using it for the positives.
Absolutely. And that's important, right, Janelle? Because some people can go through the Enneagram, and as you go through spiritual DNA, you go through this, and we don't want to use it as like a shield or a hiding place, do we?
No. And, there are kind of some do's and don'ts with Enneagram in general anyway. But first of all, because you're identified by your core motivation, it's also not something that we should assign to others.
Yeah.
Because really only we know our core motivation.
But we do it all the time, don't you?
We do.
Once you get in the Enneagram,
you must be such a 2.
3, 2, 1, yeah. Right? So
Totally.
We shouldn't type other people, because that's right. We can't judge motivations.
Yeah. But then also not using it as an excuse. And unfortunately, as we go through a lot of the identification with Enneagram, we see ourselves by those negatives, just like you said. I mean, I still can hear a 2 described and want to crawl under a table because it's still hard to hear. But we do identify often by those things that are the more negatives of our personality. And so we don't want to use it in a way to shame or to excuse behaviors either.
One of the things that's hit me right now, I've been listening to a podcast, and I would suggest if you're looking for another podcast after you finish this podcast, don't stop listening to the Daron Earlewine podcast. No, but just on your spare time after you've binged all these episodes. It's called This Cultural Moment with John Mark Cromer and Mark Sayers. And he's talking about where we are culturally right now and in this kind of secular post-Christian culture. And one of the things that has been hitting me is he talks about how we're at a place where in culture we we've lost the meaning of what it means to live in God's kingdom with God as the king of our life. And we talk about that in DNA as this idea of covenant and kingdom connection we have to God. And so culturally right now, the highest form of life, or our greatest goal most of the time, is just personal happiness. Mm-hmm. And so when we go through suffering, when we see pain, when we see the ugly side of ourselves, if we have that secular mindset, well, it's the worst thing ever, right? Because this doesn't look like happiness, and I don't want to deal with it. I have a core sin or these motivations or whatever. And it can be a very difficult journey to go into. But if we really want to become who God's created us to be, if we really see the need for actual transformation of our hearts, this can set us on a path to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. And then also, if you think about, what God desires for us in being in relationships, this is such a critical tool for us to see and appreciate others, to really see in a clearly identified way how you walk into a situation and you process it totally differently than I do.
Absolutely.
In our marriages, with our kids, in business relationships, to have that sense of appreciation and to understand that someone else is going to process it. Therefore, when they take a action that we may not agree with, we can have, in your words, that very curiously compassionate approach in relationship.
Yeah. Let's break down some brass tacks of the Enneagram real quick. Okay. Somebody maybe brand new to it. So there's 9 types.
Yes.
So run us real quick through the 9 types.
9 types. I'll use a lot of different ways of teaching use different words for the types, but I'll use the words that I like. So an Enneagram type 1 is often known as the perfectionist or the reformer.
Yeah.
Type 2 is the giver or the helper.
And you're a 2.
I'm a 2. I am so a 2. A lot of my work, though, I show up looking a lot like a 3. So a lot of my work was going back to that core motivation of understanding the core motivation of a 2 versus a 3. And my core motivation sits right inside the wheelhouse of a 2.
A 2.
But, and this is deeper than we'll go today, but there are so many layers of the Enneagram too, which is also why it truly is a lifelong growth journey. But there are subtypes of each of the 9 types. And so my subtype looks a lot like a 3.
So and that would be what we call a wing, right?
Nope. A subtype is like your social, your one-to-one, or self-preservation of each of the 9 types.
Well, we're only into the second type right now, but what I want to say is I love what you just said there about how deep it is, right? It's a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And what I want people to know is if a lot of the assessments that are part of spiritual DNA, if you go through the assessment, that's like step 1.
Right.
Right. You're coming to a place of awakening and discovery, and it's not going to all make sense. You're not going to all unpack it in a one-day workshop or even going through the course in over 6 weeks. But the deep dive in every assessment, specifically the Enneagram, is worth every minute that you pour into it and grow into it. So that's type 2. Let's go type 3.
Type 3 is the achiever. Type 4 is the individualist. Type 5 is the investigator. Type 6 is the loyalist. 7 is Daron.
That's me. That's it. It was weird when I took it for the first time. I was like, how am I already in here?
He is known as the enthusiast.
That's it.
And type 8 is the challenger, and 9 is the peacemaker.
Okay. So there are these 9 types, and one of the things that we unpack in the DNA session, and it was tough to know. You guys, you and Tracy both helped me when we were putting this session together, because it was like, man, how do I, in a 25-minute video, give somebody some kind of intro to the Enneagram that is meaningful enough, that gives them some level of discovery? And the road that I took was to walk through the intelligence centers of the 3 triads, which are gut, head, and heart.
Yes.
And the reason I did that, and what people will see when you take spiritual DNA, is I wanted people to identify the core lies that Henry Nouwen talks about that are associated with each one of these triads. And so the triads, real quick, give us the triads, and then I'll give the core motivations or the core lies with them.
The triads are the gut, as you referenced, which is a body typed center. There are 8s, 9s, and 1s. Anger is the emotion right at the surface for 8s, 9s, and 1s. The feeling triad are the 2s, 3s, and 4s, also known as the heart center. And shame is what sits at the surface for 2s, 3s, and 4s. And 5, 6, and 7 sit in the head triad, as you referenced for yourself, also known as the thinking center. And it's fear. that sits right at the surface for different reasons for each of the three types within those triads.
So what we did is pulled in the idea of the core lie there. So for the gut, for the 8, 9s, and 1s, the core lie that they hear, that kind of like operating system behind the scenes there is, I am what I accomplish, or I am what I do. And when I've sat down with 8, 9s, and 1s and unpack that, it's like a light bulb comes on where they realize, well, when I wake up in the morning, or as I lay down to go to bed, that is what haunts me most of the time. That's what's pushing me. Like, I am what I accomplish. I have to do. I have to create. I have to be perfect in the sense of a 1, and that can be so paralyzing if you don't know that's why you're doing what you're doing in any of the types.
Yeah. And each of those types within the core lie, they individually will have their own core motivation that identifies them within their type. But sitting inside that, if you think about it, even the fact that they sit in the body center, that their instinct is very gut oriented. They often, because our centers of intelligence are how we take in the world. And so they'll often describe how like they feel things in their gut first.
Yeah. So that's the gut triad, okay, or intelligence center. Then we go into the heart, and the core lie here is, I am what others think and say about me. And this is what connects to that, what you talked about, that shame, right? Because everything is motivated of a fear of disconnection of relationship or acceptance. Man, that cuts to the core in the heart triad.
Especially sitting here as a 2.
You're like, I know these things, I've heard it before, but they still cut to the core.
Yes, it still hurts. But yes, for sure. And it's really, 2s are very oriented to the needs of others. 3s can read a room on what do these people want from me, and 4s will sit in a space of kind of like, what makes me different, what makes me unique and not ordinary.
And what's key about this as we're going through, what I want you to hear as a listener or a viewer is, the key about this is realizing that all of these lies, right, they start with I am, so they're identity statements.
Right.
And the road to wholeness is to replace those lies with the truth of who God says that we are.
Right.
And when we can get there, man, things begin to unlock, and you get that road back to you, as Ian Cron would say, in that's what his book's called, about the Enneagram. Last one there is the head, which is where I'm at, and the core lie there is, I am what I have. This one was tricky for me for a while, Janelle, because for me, I was like, when I hear that, it sounds like it's about greed or possession, and it's not.
No.
And unpack what each one of those, the 5, 6, and 7, what do they need to have?
Yeah. So sitting inside that thinking triad, there's a level of fear that's driving a lot of that for each of those 3 types. For 5s in the what I have, it often has to do with knowledge.
Yeah.
And the holding on to, I am capable in all situations, and that a lot of that at the core is knowledge for 5s.
Yeah.
For 6s, it has to do with that security and safety. Their fear is very anxiety based and wanting to feel prepared and secured and safe.
Yeah.
For 7s, it's what's next?
Yeah.
What do I have to look forward to? The idea of sitting in boredom or being trapped in some sort of even emotional.
Well, when somebody said that, like, I have to have freedom and options.
Yes.
And man,
not to be limited.
Right. And when I heard that, it was like, gosh, that's so true. But what's happened for me in understanding that core lie, coming back to knowing that my significance, my freedom, my identity comes through my connection to a covenant relationship and my kingdom identity with Christ. What it did for me was it showed me, listen, for me, like contentment, gratitude, like being able to be present in a moment, like all these things opened up such a level of spiritual growth for me that brought fruit in relationships, right? And that's the core of everything we do in our connection with Christ, right? The whole piece is, the whole part of it, it's all about love. Right. It's all about coming to the place of loving others the way Christ loves us. And so I say the quote all the time, but life is relationships, right? Everything else is just the details. Thank you, Gary Smalley. And understanding that can allow us to grow in such a powerful way, and understanding the Enneagram. Anything else you want to add with the triads, Janelle?
Yeah, I mean, the Enneagram in general is, as you referenced, 9 types, and there are so many different triads. There's many different groups of 3s of how the Enneagram is structured as different levels of how we can continue to grow.
You talk about stances a lot in the sessions that you guys do with B2-3. Give us that real quick, because I know, listen, we're giving you more than you can take. Like, this is a power-packed episode. But we're hopefully giving you enough. Here's what I want. I want you to watch and listen to this episode and go, I've got to know my Enneagram type. I want to get into spiritual DNA. I want to begin the process. But then some of this conversation is going to give you some roadmaps, maybe some guardrails. Here's some things you need to be able to unpack and understand the process.
Yeah. I think there's different levels of the journey of itself too. And even the beauty of how you introduce it in DNA is that if someone's not been exposed, they can kind of get curious, and it can move beyond just, it's kind of fun when you open Instagram and find those fun memes that you're like, oh yeah, that's so a 7. Like, yes, that's a level of your Enneagram journey. And that's a great place to start even in starting to identify with a type. But as you start to unpack some of these triads, like the centers of intelligence, and then I do enjoy stance work because it shows us, just like the centers of intelligence tell us how we're taking in the world, the stance work is going to show us how we then kind of process it and how we are in these default patterns of using only 2 of the 3. And if we approach our growth in a more of a balanced approach, we look at, okay, which of those 3 centers of intelligence am I repressing naturally, and how can I start to bring it up? And just that recognition and that beginning of that process will be your growth work for the rest of your life.
Wow. Give us those 3 stances just so we give them a little
nugget. So aggressive stance are our 3s, 7s, and 8s. These stances can also help in even identification of types, because we can look at, sometimes there's a misidentification of 3s, 7s, and 8s of, am I a 3? Am I a 7? Am I 8? And we can understand, because they all sit in this triad together, of why there can be some of that confusion. So aggressive stances are doing and thinking dominant and feeling repressed. Yeah. So even if you just take that little nugget of information of knowing, okay, I sit in an aggressive stance, I recognize that I may not always draw up that feeling center. There's your growth work.
Yeah. Which is so true. Like, I literally have to sometimes look through like the whole emotion wheel that I've seen before.
Yes. Yeah, for
and
sure.
I'm actually reading Brene Brown's newest book,
Atlas of the Heart.
Oh. And I'm reading it and I'm like, I didn't even know that was an emotion, right? And then I'm like,
didn't even know it had a name.
Didn't know it had a name. Like, do I ever feel that? Like, so yes, I'm feeling repressed. I'm in therapy. It's working. But so continue.
Yeah. So just taking that nugget and knowing, okay, that's something I have to be very aware of and intentional around. 4, 5s, and 9s sit in the withdrawn stance. And so they are going to be doing repressed. So they're going to think and feel on a loop. And so they can ask themselves, what do I need to do about this? So it's going to be more natural for them to withdraw and not take action around things. Okay. And then 1s, 2s, and 6s are the dependent stance. And we are thinking repressed, so we're going to, like for myself as example, as a 2, I am going to feel, and then I'm going to think about what I feel. And then I'm going to feel, and I'm going to think about what I feel. And for me, and kind of leading into some of your future episodes of more that you unpack with DNA, that was hard for me because I have input, I have learner, I have developer, intellect.
As your strengths.
As my strengths.
Yeah.
And so if you look at me and you tell me that I'm thinking repressed, that's kind of hard to hear because I think all the time. But what I had to ask myself is, am I thinking productively? So a lot of my growth journey has been recognizing that I'm thinking constantly in a loop, but I may not be thinking about the right things. I may still be thinking about how I left you feeling or thinking about what happened 2 weeks ago about a feeling.
Yeah. So good, Janelle. Listen, we're in the deep end of the pool here, but that's where we're taking the Dinner in the White podcast. I love that you brought up strengths. So the next episode on the podcast is going to be a deep dive with Tracy Cheatham into strengths, which is such a beautiful assessment and such a great place. But I want to close with this. What I love about what we've been able to bring with the Enneagram, and I think one of the difficult things in growing in a relationship with Christ and trying to become who God's created us to be is that a lot of times people don't. The idea of a growth path becomes difficult, right? And I think we've dumbed it down to people. It's like, well, you need to go to church right? You need to listen to sermons, read your Bible, and pray. Which, yes, those are core things and activities that need to be done. But it's like, yeah, but what am I specifically working on?
Right.
What am I growing on? Where is it that in the Enneagram's a connection of, they talk about nature, nurture, and choice. The place that I've gotten through nature, nurture, and choice, where are the specific areas that I need to see more and more of Christ's character developed? Because it's different for you than for me,
Right.
and it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And so what I love about what the Enneagram allows people to do is say, hey, listen, like a gym idea, right? If like you come and do a gym and somebody goes, hey, listen, you probably need to work on chest and legs, right? Like you don't just go in there and stand around in the gym and do the same thing over and over and over again. It allows you to find that custom growth plan. Janelle, I'm so excited about what we're going to get to do together this year with B23. People are going to hear more and more about that. Thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for being you and being a wonderful number 2 helper, type 2 helper, feeler, just lover.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you, Daron.
Janelle DeWolf, and we appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on the Daron Earlewine podcast. Until we talk again, remember these 3 things. God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far from you. And he's created you on purpose and for purpose.